What I want to do in this lesson is talk about when relationships end and the concepts that have been established in the process of divorce from the Christian perspective, namely looking at the Church of England's approach to divorce and annulment of marriage, as well as the Catholic Church's approach to annulment of marriage and divorce as well. So, essentially, there are various Christian approaches to what happens when certain relationships end. Now, I'm going to be focusing mainly on the concept of divorce because the idea of, early 20s or late teens as boyfriends and girlfriends breaking up is a little bit different to that of the sacrament of marriage within the context of the Catholic Church and the way in which those kinds of relationships end. So, we're essentially talking about what happens when relationships end, but the certain relationship in question is that of divorce. Now, essentially, in this lesson, we're going to draw on two main Christian approaches to this issue. We're going to talk about the view of the Catholic Church in the approach towards divorce, and then we'll talk about the view of the Church of England when it comes to divorce. We'll talk about what those views are, first of all, and then talk about why they have those views. What do those views say about the ways in which the Catholic Church and the Church of England approach this kind of doctrine? So, the Catholic approach to divorce, as Henry VIII found out, is very strict. Essentially, their belief in this particular instance is that marriage is not just a legal document that takes place between two people. It is, but there are also additional factors, because it is also an agreement that is made with God. And so as a result of this, breaking said agreement, i.e. breaking up a marriage by going through the process of divorce, not only are you breaking this legal agreement that you have, but there is also the holy agreement that is made before God that is broken as well. And so as a result of this particular mindset, and as a result of this particular approach, the Catholic Church places a very strict idea relating to that of divorce. They place a very strict amount of limitations on the concept of divorce. Essentially, those who are experiencing difficulties, so those marriages and those couples who experience difficulties, are encouraged to seek support from the church. Now, this is something that is done in view of the fact that they want these troubles to actually be resolved without the process of divorce. Now, the Catholic Church specifically, may allow for the couple to separate while this takes place. Now, this is not a formal separation in the way that it is a breaking up of the marriage, but separate in terms of the physical space, for example. And they may not engage in any kind of relationship or any kind of sexual activity with other people outside of the marriage during this period of separation. So again, as you can probably imagine, that being the case. So, if divorce does take place, then the Catholic Church does not allow remarriage. And this is because it is considered to be adultery. And we have this particular passage here from the Bible that tries to exemplify this idea. That says here that from the book of Matthew, but I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress. And anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. So, again, there are very, very limited instances whereby an individual can get a divorce, and one of them here is the idea of marital unfaithfulness as presented by the Bible itself. And you cannot remarry. You can't remarry, and you cannot be in a relationship with anybody else. It is considered to be adulterous as a result. Now, while this is a very strict line for the Catholic Church, very few divorces are allowed by the Catholic Church from a very strict perspective, one may be able to find a approach to this particular issue by talking about marriage annulment. So annulment may be an option for individuals who wish to separate from their partner in the event of a marriage. Now, annulment is not the same as a divorce, and that's what's important that we should know. Because what annulment is the process of finding a justification for a marriage to be null and void, and thus invalidate the process. So, for example, if you can think of a reason and you can find justification for why the marriage was illegitimate in the first place, then the marriage itself was never a legitimate marriage. And so it can be null and void, and it can be annulled, and therefore it never existed. Now, one way annulment takes place is if an individual does not consent to the marriage in the first place, as you can imagine. So if it transpired in the future that the individual had not consented to the marriage, then the marriage would have never been valid. It would have been null and void. And so this just goes to the view that marriage is something that is agreed upon by both parties, and therefore it will invalidate the marriage if one does not agree, as you can probably imagine. Now, going back to Henry VIII, he managed to get justification by way of annulment, or at least his argument for annulment was that he had married his brother's widow. And it was seen as within the Book of Revelation that is something that you don't do. Now, the sort of theological debate that was had between Henry VIII's Cardinal Wolsey, and the Catholic Church was whether or not the death of his brother Prince Arthur was something that made a difference to that particular marriage itself. They were very, very strict, and it led to the break of the of England from the Catholic Church in the creation of the Church of England. So, as a famous story of people trying to struggle to get a divorce in the Catholic tradition, you can always derive you can always look to some of Henry VIII's troubles as examples. Now, when it comes to the Church of England, there are different approaches to the concept of divorce. They have a much more liberal view of divorce, as you can probably imagine, than that of the Catholic Church. And essentially, according to the view of the Church of England, there is a recognition that when there are certain circumstances that are in play, divorce may be an inevitable thing that will take place. Now, the Church of England doesn't encourage divorce in any circumstance, necessarily. It pushes to keep marriages together, and it would probably rather have marriages together and keep marriages together, but it does recognise that there are some circumstances in which a marriage is unsalvageable, and so therefore the practice of divorce is a useful tool in being able to separate these individuals. Now, that is the reason that a result of this particular recognition and the result of this particular outlook means that an individual who wishes to divorce is free to do so. And the process of how that individual is viewed within the church itself after the divorce is very different to that of the Catholic Church as well, because the divorcee who has just been divorced, they have the ability to remarry within the church if this is something that is allowed by the parish priest. So they sort of just leave that to the discretion of the parish priest, whether or not they allow that individual to remarry. Now, whether or not they do remarry and whether or not they are allowed to be remarried probably depends on the circumstances of the divorce itself. So there may be circumstances in relation to adultery, which of course is a legitimate justification for divorce. It could just be other reasons that may have led to the fact that the marriage was unsalvageable, and so therefore the parish priest allows remarriage as well. All of these things are, again, up to the discretion of the parish priest, but you can see here that if we were to compare the two different approaches to the concept of divorce, the Church of England has a far more liberal view of divorce than that of the Catholic Church.